This is page 337. We are on lesson 12.2, independent and dependent variables in tables and graphs. The essential question, how can you identify independent and dependent quantities from tables and graphs? We have an explore activity. Identifying independent and dependent quantities from a table. Many real-world situations involve two variable quantities in which one quantity depends on the other. The quantity that depends on the other is called the dependent variable, and the quantity it depends on is called the independent variable. A freight train moves at a constant speed. The distance y in miles that the train has traveled after x hours is shown in the table. So what you notice here is that time is passing. We go from 0 hours to 1 hour to 2 hours to 3 hours. And as time is passing, the distance is increasing. At 0 hours, the distance is 0. At 1 hour, the distance is 50. What are the two quantities in this situation? They just want to know the words here. What are the two quantities? Time and distance. And which of these quantities depends on the other? Well, I want you to think about it. One of these things will happen whether the train is traveling or not, and the other one depends on the other. So what will happen regardless? Time will pass no matter what. Whether the train's broke down or whether the train is moving, time will pass. But the distance the train goes can only depend on the time. So what we're going to say here is that the distance of the train depends on time. And so what is the independent variable? Well, time is. And we could, if we wanted to call it x or y, we'd call it x. And what is the dependent variable? It's the distance, the y value. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next part, part B. And part B reads, let me see if I can probably just do the whole thing right here. Part B reads, how far does the train travel each hour? Well, if you go back to the table, you notice that it's going up by 1 hour on the x row. It's going up by 1, and the distance is going up by 50. So what we can conclude there is that it's going 50 miles each hour. So that's all we have to put here, 50 miles each hour. The relationship between the distance traveled by the train and the time in hours can be represented by an equation in two variables. The distance is going to be y, and that's going to be equal to 50 times x. And the reason why it's going to be 50 times x is because we already decided that it's 50 miles per hour, and x is going to be time in hours, so it's going to be 50 times x. And we can take x out and replace it with a 1, that'd be 1 times 50. We could take x out and replace it with a 2, that'd be 2 times 50, which is 100. And you can see that on the table. You can see right here on the table that all of the y values are, well, starting here, are 50 times greater than the x values. So 1 times 50 is 50, 2 times 50 is 100, 3 times 50 is 150, and we could just keep going. All right, this video is going to go on to the next page and do the reflect questions. It's going to do these 3 questions, and then we're going to stop there. All right, number 1, analyze relationships. Describe how the value of the independent variable is related to the value of the dependent variable. Is the relationship additive or multiplicative? Well, we talked about it. Are we adding to get those values, or are we multiplying? It's multiplicative. So what we can say here is we can say the y values are 50 times greater than the x values. That was a really tricky question, and it wasn't asking for like a really complicated answer. The y values are 15 times greater than the x values. That's all we needed for this one. Number 2 reads, what are the units of the independent variable and of the dependent variable? Well, the units just mean what are we talking about. So the independent variable goes by hours. And the dependent variable is miles. And that's just on the table. If you went back and looked at the table, you'd see that along the top we're talking about hours, and along the bottom we're talking about miles. Number 3, a rate is used in the equation. What is the rate? Well, the very bottom of page 337, they write this equation, y equals 50 times x. The rate is the number. What is the rate? It is 50. And we're supposed to label 50 what? Well, we're talking about 50 miles each hour, so it's called 50 miles per hour. Okay, this video is going to come to a stop here, and the next video will be the remainder of page 338. So good job, you are done with the beginning of lesson 12.2.